All right. Well, welcome. So I'm Johnny Nelson, and this is Josh Poorman. I'm going to let him kind of talk about himself here in a minute, but we're together over Zoom to 30 something former history majors that have kept going in the fields of history or related fields for now over a decade since college, which is crazy. And we don't have a whole lot of time on our hands. We're both young dads. We're both married. We both have jobs, thank God. And things have gotten crazy here in February of 2025 as we're recording this. And so, Josh and I, we've been texting back and forth a lot. We've been emailing back and forth a lot. We've been sending a lot of news articles back and forth about the state of the world and the state of our country. And I don't know, it feels so helpless to just sit here and rant and rage. And the term I see sometimes now is doom scroll, and that seems so ineffective. And so we wanted to get together and at least talk through some of this stuff together as two guys that are concerned with where our country's sitting and where society sits. And we both view this kind of through not totally the same lens, I don't think, Josh, right? But the lens of people who care a lot about American history, and who think a lot about American history on a daily basis. So we've been friends since Gettysburg College. We were both history majors there, and I am now a history professor. And Josh is doing well. I'll let him talk about what he's doing out in California. But we both went on to get PhDs in history, and now we're kind of in far-flung corners of the country. And so we're coming back together to talk about this stuff, and it's going to be interesting. Josh, can you tell us a little bit more about the thinking that went into like this very pulled together shoestring budget, shoot from the hip idea of recording our conversation today?
Yeah. Well, that's a nice intro, Johnny. And I'm glad you went first because you had the task of trying to sound semi-professional, and now I can come in and just call a spade and say, this is cringe, this is awkward, it's almost embarrassing. I mean, I think we're both proud of doing this right now, but it's also a little embarrassing. I mean, what are we doing here on a Zoom that might or might not be posted online? It's a good question. But the thinking that went into this specific thing that you, as a viewer, might be watching, started 36 hours ago. Um,
Yeah.
and here we are. And basically, the gist of it is this. Speaking just for myself, I'm incredibly frustrated, and I felt pretty helpless, I think, the past
Yeah.
few weeks. And nothing that's happened, I mean, will just come out like since Trump's second inauguration, which is, I think, what's largely precipitated this. There's nothing that's really all that surprising, or there's really not that much that's different from the first Trump administration, in terms of like the goals and how things I think Trump would like to see play out. But things are happening fast, they're moving fast, and I think the worst thing to do is to sit around as two guys and say, "Oh, let's do a podcast and let's really like make it professional and make sure it's polished." And well, things are moving so fast that I think we both felt, let's just get on, make it awkward, and dive into stuff kind of raw and unedited. And that's not to say if we keep doing this that it won't get more polished as we go, but certainly right now, I mean, you said the phrase shooting from the hip. That's literally what we're doing. There is no planning, no prep at all that went into this, other than a phone call that happened about 25 minutes ago. Uh, so yeah, that's where we're at. And initially we thought, hey, let's write some Facebook posts, or let's maybe do an op-ed, or let's maybe write some like little pithy articles on like, historical factoids and how they're relevant today. And it's like, well, I mean, like let's just cut to the chase and talk. I mean, people
Yeah.
need to see people talking. We're in this
Right.
predicament right now, not just with the current political climate, but in terms of the way we live our lives, where we
Yeah.
don't talk to one another. And Zoom or Teams or whatever the recording is certainly ain't face to face, but it's the next best thing. And so that's why we're here. And just again, just to, as Johnny said, I'd talk a little bit about myself. So I'm an architectural historian right now in Pasadena, California. And it's not necessarily the same. It's a very different field of historic preservation than like the teaching of history in an academic setting. But you touch on a lot of the same things on a daily basis, and you're still required to stay informed and up to date on what's going on. So I'm definitely an historian if my title really right now for my job is architectural historian. Um, and yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. Then I think, people listening to this someday or whenever we post it, uh, you know, anyone who's thinking historically is a historian, right? Like, my dad doesn't have an advanced degree. He reads a lot of history books, right? And he compares a lot of history to the present, and that's thinking historically. And it's true for, I don't know, a lot of the people that I think of in my life that are not historians by trade, but still love history, still love kind of, especially, specific topics in history, whatever. But we think historically. We think about, well, how does this connect with the past? How does the past shape the present and the future? That in itself is thinking historically. And one of the things that Josh and I talk about a lot as friends is like we've kind of lost the ability to do that, right? We don't think critically about what we're hearing in the news, or we don't think critically about, well, how does this ideology match up with what outcomes are actually happening? And not being able to think historically, I think, is one of the underlying problems, not just a symptom, but one of the underlying problems that has led us to this kind of hysterical state in society. Um, I'll say too, right? Josh and I are both, I don't know, blue collar background sound right, Josh? Like we,
Mhm.
we grew up in Pennsylvania and Ohio in kind of rust belty places. We've got a lot of good friends and family in those places. And our networks, for lack of a better word, they kind of run the gamut of who we're friends with, politically speaking, and otherwise, right? So my hope is that we can have a civil conversation, not just on this podcast, but anyone who's listening to this, right? I hope, yeah, we're gonna be self-deprecating. This is gonna be a mess. The recording's not gonna be high quality stuff. Um, but it's just two guys genuinely trying to talk about this uh, current state of our country without any of the frills and fringes of that. So bear with us is I guess the point, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
And what I'll say is this. I mean, just building on your point about how your dad is a great example of someone who's really interested in history. History is a field of study, and um, rocket science is a field of study, and hydrology is a field of study. They're not all the same in terms of accessibility. If I was going to have a conversation about how to have open heart surgery, it would probably start right there and it would end right now. I don't know how any of that works. And unless I need an open heart surgery, it's not all that relevant. I mean, the fact that we can do it, great. But it's like
yeah,
it's a very, very specified and specific thing that
technical.
is needed for a specific group of people who need open heart surgeries. History's different, right? It affects
Yeah,
all of us on a daily basis, whether we acknowledge that or think that or not. And so there's a double-edged sword to it because it is accessible. You can go to Barnes and Noble and pick up any book on that shelf under U.S. history and learn something from it. Um, but there's also a profession, and there's a training that goes into becoming a professional historian that's different from what we call armchair historians. And I have really no desire to like say anything beyond that. in terms of like what we've specifically done as historians in training over the course of, I think, probably 10 plus years for both of us at Gettysburg College, and then, Notre Dame for yourself, and USC for myself. But one of the, I think, recurring talking points that we're probably going to touch on is, this debate over facts, uh, which is never going to get any less weird. To say that we're in a situation now where, we could have any number of people on here as a guest, and we'd have to set out some basic facts so we can all agree on before even having a conversation. And, that's always been a kind of an inherent fear of mine personally, and maybe is partially why I decided to, one, get into history, and two, to then pursue it at the doctorate level, is like I'm very just personally afraid of being called out as wrong on something. I like to keep my cards close to my chest. I like to not sound like an idiot. I like to really know what I'm talking about before I say anything, which is one of the reasons why this is tough. I mean, for me, especially compared to Johnny, because as Johnny will tell you, or maybe he wouldn't tell you, we did a lot together at Gettysburg College. Gave presentations, wrote papers, published papers, and Johnny is, as you're already seeing, is a very naturally gifted orator,
uh,
and well, relative to myself, I've come a long way since Gettysburg College, but um, it's tough. It's tough to put yourself out
yeah,
there and say stuff, and it's especially tough when you're beholden to the facts
facts. Yep.
of the matter, because then you need to sound eloquent and appear eloquent and have a positive, put forth a positive image of yourself, but also know what you're talking about. And as we've seen lately, in at least in American political discourse, that doesn't really ring true for everybody. And
Right.
it's quite possible for us to get on here and just start talking about stuff and have no idea what we're talking about, and
Yeah.
maybe come across even more confident than if we were kind of beholden to these facts. But there's a lot I think anyone who's watching this is getting at. Like, I think I'm implying a lot, and maybe not getting into the specifics just yet, but certainly I think we will over the course of however many conversations we have. Um, you have to be beholden to the facts. And I don't
Yeah.
even want to say truth, because that's fraught with so much um, discourse now. And so, just to wrap up this thought, I mean, the one thing I got out of getting a PhD, and I just, finished it last year, is I'm very comfortable now defining my ignorance, acknowledging what I don't know,
Mhm.
um, being honest about that. If I don't know something about something, I'm not going to give some half-hearted opinion, uh, which anyone who knows about that subject would say, like, hey, he doesn't really know what he's talking about. You have to be honest with yourself about what you know and what you don't know. And there's a lot I don't know. And there's a lot going on that doesn't make sense to me. And I'm looking forward to relying on you, my friend, Johnny, to help me get through that. And I'm sure vice versa. That's why we're doing this. We're
Yeah.
trying to make sense
Yeah.
of it. And I hope that people watching will uh, at least acknowledge that kind of earnest impulse, I think.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I totally agree with you, Josh, and say, part of the reason we wanted to get together and talk about this, and whoever's harebrained scheme it was to record this thing, who knows? But part of it's therapeutic and like group therapy almost, in Josh and I trying to make sense of this together in conversation, because neither of us are experts, right? We're not sitting on Capitol Hill. We're not sitting at the Pentagon assessing the situation here. We're just two, like, yes, two well-trained historians, but that doesn't mean we know anything beyond what we research and what we read about and pay attention to. So yeah, there's a lot we don't know, and it's okay to admit that these are the facts we have, and then this is the knowledge beyond that. I think a lot of what Josh is implying is we've now entered this world where facts have become, if not meaningless, a whole lot less valuable. right? People can spew all kinds of claims, and we've seen these claims spewed, and we don't have to get into the specific news stories even, right? But there's a lot of rhetoric without a lot of evidence to back up that rhetoric. There's a lot of claims about what's been spent and what money's been wasted and how many incompetents are in the bureaucracy without a whole lot of hard facts behind that, right? And so if you say it loud enough, you say it with enough money, you say it enough blitz or glitz. People pay attention and they think you know what you're talking about. That's not what this is. This is about. This is just us um, trying to piece together what we know and trying to make sense of how this current moment relates to human nature and American history and all of the above. So we're angry a little bit, we're scared a little bit, we're confused a little bit, as are most people in America now, right? I mean, Josh, it's been 3 weeks since Trump came into power again, and uh, so why are we doing this at this particular moment? Like, what's the crossroads that has kind of pushed you and I over the edge to not just text things out in rage or in confusion, but to actually start talking about this stuff?
It's the speed at which current events are progressing, not even on a daily basis, on sometimes an hourly basis. And it's the competence. I wouldn't say competence. It's the effectiveness with which this stuff is getting done.
Yeah.
Now, to a lot of people, maybe some people listening to this, that would mean it's, things are happening that are quote unquote owning the libs, right?
Uh-huh.
And
Yeah.
so I feel
Cleaning
very
cleaning house, draining the swamp. I mean, we
right.
can
I feel
yeah.
very owned
Yeah.
right now, and
Yeah,
maybe this is
sure.
just my defensive reaction to it, and my pushback. But generally speaking, I think one critique of the left or liberals or Democrats is that they take the high ground and let the bull in the china shop go crazy, and then instead of also getting a bull in the china shop, they, I don't know, try to pick up the pieces. I mean, that metaphor is going to break down, but I think we're trying to fight fire with fire now, right?
Yeah,
Like,
sure.
and I think we're at the point now because of the effectiveness with which all this is happening. And again, I alluded earlier to say like, well, there in some ways this ain't that different from Trump administration one back in 2016. It's
Right.
just that, we can talk for days, if not months, about Trump. But one thing he's a master media manipulator. He knows how
Mhm.
to present himself masterfully. Um,
Right.
in front of whatever media, right? Like, and I think he'd probably tell you in private, like when he ran for office and then started in his first term, like there's a lot he didn't know about how to be
Run a
effective,
government. Yeah.
run a government.
Yeah.
And these ideas that are now surfacing, I think were latent there, and maybe they tried, but weren't very effective. And
Mhm.
now there's been, 10 years or so of creating this well-oiled machine, which has now been uh,
Unleashed.
unleashed, yeah,
Yeah.
unchained, or whatever you want to call it. And so, like, getting back, yeah, like, you're gonna have a podcast, great. Let's think about a great name. Let's get a little intro theme. Like, no, it's who knows where we're going to be a week from now.
Yeah.
So that's why it's happening right now on February 15th as we're recording this. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So, anyone on the kind of Trumpian side of what's happening, they just get on X or they get on Truth Social or they get on Fox News and they spitball their answers to why they're going to cut U.S. aid or why they're going to fire the archivist of the United States or why they're going to cancel grant money. Without necessarily having all the facts assembled, and that gets tiring, because we've been so careful as historians, as people who love institutions, as the so-called establishment, those of us who are more little c conservative in how we approach government and how we operate in society, and that is not the strategy of Trump or Trump's people, and so you know we're going to kind of try to talk about this unscripted and in a way that gets to some of these bigger questions about truth, about facts, about alternative realities that seem to be kind of animating um, not just Trump, but Trump's base and people across the country who think that this looks fun to wreck the system and to you know supposedly root out corruption. So
Hmm.
that I mean that's kind of my thinking here, right, Josh? In
Yeah.
terms of that, and this moment feels important because Trump is moving so quickly, because Elon Musk has been given such a wide range of powers to go at the federal government um, with his cost cutting measures and let's talk a little bit about this melding of I think we've got Trumpian populism and we've got Elon Musk coming in as the richest man in the world and this consolidation of billionaires and political figures and kind of populist angst all seems to be meshing together to drive this engine of destruction, right? I mean,
Hmm. Hmm.
why are the
Yep.
billionaires in on this? I don't know. That's a great question, but we'll probably talk about that too in future
That's
iterations of
certainly,
this.
I mean, I think the remarks there are kind of getting at the core of all of this. And I don't know if I'd be capable of giving you a pottage 2 or 3 sentence answer on why they're in charge. I mean, the answer is neoliberalism. Um, we're in, who knows if it's the end of the era or just the beginning, but from the late 20th century onward, we're in the era of neoliberalism, and that's the neo built onto liberalism, which has nothing to do with liberal versus conservative in an American sense. It's a much broader, basically, what does it mean to be an American? Well, go look up the Wikipedia article on liberalism, and you'll see a lot of basic tenets. And the neo is, kind of this return to the free markets and kind of a deregulation of the markets to the benefit of corporations. And, that's all a bunch of isms and very academic thinking. What does that mean? That, the theory back to Reagan is trickle down economics. We cut tax breaks for the rich, and they invest in society, and it trickles down to the rest of us, and we reap the benefits. Um, I mean, the House just came out with their proposed budget, right? At
Yeah,
4.5 in tax. Like, again, I'm a bit hesitant to get into real specifics right now because I do
that's
think we
fine.
can kind of
Yeah,
lay out some basic contours of what this podcast might look like going forward. But that is the heart of it, right? That is the state we're in a nutshell from an economic perspective, and that's incredibly important.
yeah,
Um, and and well, I mean, that's an understatement. That like
yeah.
but it's not the whole story. Um,
Well, let's get into even just a bigger picture, right? Like, so okay, I guess a two-part question here that I think you and I should both spend a little time answering is the um like okay, so people who have listened to us here for the last 15 minutes have heard that we're angry, we're scared, we're tired, right? We also are kind of at a loss about what to do about all this stuff. I think people have gathered that we are shocked and a little not just a little outraged at what Trump and his people have done since they've come back into power. But what is it specifically that scares you, Josh, or what has animated you to this point? And then maybe after that, you and I can talk about well, what can history actually do for us in that case, right?
yeah,
But what is actually scary about what's going on so far? Trump hasn't fired you. He hasn't fired me. He hasn't rounded our families up yet or anything like that. So what is it when people because people that aren't scared don't understand why we're scared, why we're worried, why we see a problem. And so what is it that is so problematic at the root of all this?
yeah. I have a feeling I'm going to answer this different than you're expecting me to answer it, and so maybe you
Okay,
can
well
give
we'll have different answers maybe.
yeah, maybe, but maybe you can come in and give your own answer because here's what I'm scared of. I'm 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 a very confident person. But I'm terrified right now. And the reason I'm terrified is because I can count on one hand the number of people in my life that I can have a serious conversation with about the state of our country.
Good. Okay.
Um,
Yeah, that is scary. Right.
and maybe that's because I'm like a social introvert and I don't talk to a lot of people. I think whatever. Like I think I have a normal amount of friends, right? Like I'm not like the most outgoing and gregarious person that like, maybe yourself, but I like there are people in my life that I should be able to talk to stuff about that I just
Yeah.
can't. And it and
Yeah.
it stems from a number of different reasons, and I wouldn't want to ever put every person that fits that profile into the same box. I mean, everyone's bringing their own experiences, beliefs, and worldviews to the table, and a lot of it just has to do with the fact that um, we've had time to as in a PhD program, you're given money to read and to write,
Hmm.
and sit around a table and talk to other people from different backgrounds on stuff like this. And
Yeah.
it has been a real privilege, and it's also afforded us some insight that someone who's, working nonstop and raising kids, doesn't have that time to do.
Yeah.
So I'm scared because we can't have these conversations
Yeah.
with more than just from myself, a handful of people, and I hope this is a way to kind of begin to bridge that gap. But
Yeah.
I'm also scared because the reason, it's a bit disingenuous to say the reason we can't have those conversations is because they're too busy. People are too busy.
Yeah.
We don't we're living in separate realities right now, two sides of the country, the polarization of the country, and anyone, no matter what your political beliefs are, like there's no disagreeing, right? Like the most
Yeah.
Trumpian supporter is gonna uh, acknowledge that like this is incredibly polarizing, at least
Yeah.
in terms of my
Yeah.
lifetime and our lifetime. Uh, and it's even, I think it's more polarizing now than it was in 2016. I think.
Hmm.
Um, so I'm scared of the breakdown of communication.
Yeah.
And I think that's the root cause. I don't think Trump is the cause of all these
Right.
problems. I think he's the symptom. And I think
Mm.
the root cause, just to put a bow on it neatly, is the breakdown of communication, and
Yeah.
public discourse.
Yeah, that's
Well,
really well said. Yeah, no, that's I think you got to more of the root than what I was going to say, even right. Which, um, yeah, the idea that we can't sit down and discuss this and debate it and without being painted as, well, you're a liberal or you're a Trumpian and that sort of thing is terrifying. The idea that there are people now in the political world, right, even everyday people who see the other side of the political spectrum not as just someone who disagrees with them about policy or about um, morality, but as an enemy, right? Capital E enemy, and that is terrifying. And it's almost a way of like, I think Trump has fed into this rhetoric of they're your enemy, they're faceless, um, they're not like us, so to speak, and they are a danger within, and that's really dangerous rhetoric to start flinging around because it's untrue, right? Like if you go out into the United States today, I mean, I live in a very red part of the country, you live in a very blue part of the country, right? But if you walk down the street and have conversations with people not about politics, you'll find that most of them are quite reasonable, right? And so I don't know how we shut that reasonable rationality off when we turn on the TV and start watching the news or when we pull up our phone and start reading it. But that seems to be what's happened. I was going to be much more structural in my answer, Josh. I was going to say, the I said this to someone the other day that I was kind of discussing or arguing this on social media, and they said, well, what is it you're opposed to that he's doing? I said, it's not even, I mean, there are things I'm absolutely fundamentally opposed to that Trump and his regime are doing, but deeper than that, it's not just that I'm opposed to what he's doing, I'm opposed to how he's doing it, right? So my structural answer about what scares me is I think we're headed into a constitutional crisis if we're not there already, right? And that Trump Trump's advisors, people working with Trump, like Elon Musk, seem to have absolutely no regard for the Constitution of the United States and its checks and balances. They don't respect the separation of the three branches of government. And they seem to think that a electoral victory in November gives Trump the right of a king, right? The right of a dictator, the right of rule by fiat. And that really enrages me as someone who cares a lot about why the United States is a representative, Republican democracy and not a authoritarian state and not a monarchy and not anything else, right? There have to be checks and balances. And if the person in charge or one of the people in charge doesn't believe in those checks and balances, then that's a very scary place to be. And that's what gets me riled up, right? But I think fundamentally you're right that the root cause of even the rise to Trump's power is a fundamental breakdown in communication, fundamental breakdown in how we share facts and opinions.
And it gets to this issue of like, well, where is the problem? Is it with the symptom or uh,
Mm-hmm. What do you
is it with the
diagnose and what do you
cause?
try to cure? Yeah.
Because on one hand, you'd say, well, um, you know, we were we were a bullet being an inch or two away from none of this happening, and I don't think that would be true. Um, there's these issues of um not being able to talk to one another are going to continue well beyond Trump. Uh,
Yes.
whether or not he's out of office in 4 years or not, or if I mean, he is old, right? There's that fact too
Yeah.
that we all forgot. But at the same time, though, you know, I don't want to be a bit too like umbrella. Like I don't want to ignore the fact that, well, actually, maybe the big problem now is the fact that he is president, and as you're saying, we seem to be heading towards or potentially already in a constitutional crisis, and these checks and balances that we all learned about in eighth grade, well, they don't seem to be there right now for a number of reasons, and it might take the power of the people to protest in the streets to
Yeah.
actually kind of speak up. And I mean, again, this is something I think we should dive into wholeheartedly, but not today in this kind of introductory episode. But if and when that happens, um, we've seen with George Floyd the potential response that a President Trump will have to
Yeah.
protests.
Right.
This thing could devolve very quickly, and it's I'm not trying to be fear mongering, but we're doing this right now, kind of off the cuff, shoot from the hip, because we don't know how quickly things are going to change. And
Right.
best case scenario, we're watching this back, laughing to ourselves a couple of years from now, saying, "Well, what was all the concern for?"
That would be
Um,
great. Right.
that would be
But
great.
yeah.
I would love to just like make fun of myself for doing this podcast or these podcasts 10 years
Yeah.
from now.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's best case scenario, but
Yeah.
I think we're not sure. And I mean, there's one thing I want to touch on, which is again getting back to the fact that like we're academics. Like, why are we doing this? Are we, how would we posture ourselves? Are we two historians talking on a podcast, or are we two Americans talking on a podcast? Or maybe if you ask some people, are we two communists? Are we two
Two
radical left
liberals.
wing,
Yeah.
people trying to overthrow, like
Right.
I think like look, I mean, I would say we're two Americans very concerned with the country.
That's right.
And
Yeah.
um that trumps being historians. Like this ain't me as an historian.
Yeah.
I think we both feel like we have a lot to offer to people that might be listening to this in terms of insights into like the historical past, and certainly your expertise in the kind of early American experience and the revolution and like the founding fathers, and there's a ton. I mean, we can learn and bring to the table on that
Yeah.
respect, and myself as well from like the late 20th century and
Yeah.
kind of this, the deindustrialization of the country, the disillusionment of the working class.
That's right.
Um, all of it, like we can bring a lot to the table historically, but that's not like we're not doing this because of that. We're doing this because we're like very worried about the state of America and what it means to be an American. And I
Yeah.
don't, I mean, whether it's because you're busy or because you're apathetic and you're ignorant and or it's because you think like, wow, good. Like let's watch all these liberals get owned. This is fun. It is fun for a lot of people. It's
Yeah.
worrisome, right?
Yeah.
Like,
You should be concerned. And you know, you could probably find reason to be concerned for a lot of different, pick it's a buffet line of concerns, right? And that's, yeah, I think why we're doing it. So okay, so we're doing this, we're scared, we're concerned. Why is history going to be any comfort to us? I mean, why even bring history into this, right? The fact that we're okay, we're two buddies that met in a history class, fine. But does history have anything to offer in terms of solace, in terms of lessons, in terms of, I don't know what, like, what's the value of it? Because, if you listen to some people, we should just cut all the history programs. They're full of commies and socialists anyway, and they're teaching distorted stuff. So why does anyone need to learn history? Then you listen to the other side, and it's like, well, they need to learn, George Washington was the first president, and they need to learn facts and dates, and they need to learn about heroes. Is there anything in between that history offers besides those two extreme answers?
yeah. Well, I think you're asking two different questions, both of which we need
Okay,
to. One
good.
is one is what is history?
Yeah.
And that's the easier to answer. But maybe we'll do that second. It's the lower hanging fruit. The first one is like why?
Exactly.
Well, maybe it's two sides of the same question. I don't know, but like here's I'm glad you asked this because I've thought about this. I don't know if I've ever vocalized it to anyone, but let's take, every American has a favorite sports team, right? So let's talk about sports. One of the critiques of academia or liberals or like the left-wing establishment is that when it comes to history, left-wing people, I mean, it's hard to even define it, but let's just say the left. The left hates America. The left thinks
That's the assumption, right? Yeah.
we're this
Or that
awful
academic historians hate America. Yeah.
academic historians hate America.
Sure.
We want to focus on the bad stuff. We want to focus on slavery and Jim Crow and what happened to the Native Americans and all this awful stuff and like the Vietnam War and it was a terrible war and what we should be doing is really valorizing the country. We should be talking about how great of a place this is to live, right? Okay, so let's talk about sports for a second. I'm a Minnesota Vikings fan. Um, the Vikings had an incredibly surprising year. They overperformed. This was supposed to be a rebuild year. Um, and we won a lot of games and we got into the playoffs. And in the playoffs, our offensive line got absolutely destroyed. And so if I'm a fan of the Vikings and I go onto, let's say, Reddit and I say, we have the best team in the world. We have an absolutely great team. There's nothing wrong with it. Nothing needs fixed.
Yeah.
We're the best country in the world. We're an exceptional team. No one's gonna beat us. We're just the best. Are we gonna win a Super Bowl the next year?
With
No,
that attitude, no.
we're not. Like we need to get on to that forum where Vikings fans are talking about the team and the state of the team and say, hey, our offensive line is dog shit. Can we please get some better people in there so that our quarterback isn't being harassed on a play-by-play basis? Um, the idea that like history is all about valorizing the country, it's just fundamentally not true. And that
Yeah.
doesn't mean we hate America. It means we
Right.
love America and we're proud to be Americans. I'm proud to be a Vikings fan, and I'm proud
Yeah.
of the fact that I'm willing to say, hey, our offensive line is dog shit. Let's fix it, please. Because what I want from my Vikings team is for them to win a Super Bowl. And
Yeah.
anyone who doesn't want that isn't a real Vikings fan in my mind.
Right.
Now that's low stakes. That's a sports team. But like when it comes to the US and it comes to American history, and this is for any history,
Yeah.
but when it comes to American history, like why are historians focused on the negative, I guess you could say? Well, it's because there's room to improve. There's
That's
room
right.
to get the country to a better place, whatever
Yeah.
that might mean. And certainly
Yeah.
people disagree on how to get there, but identifying the issues that we have and hoping that being better informed about those issues will help us get to a place where we can improve, you know, and I won't even like we don't even need to get into specifics, but that's really I think the sports thing is like find me a fan of a team who just thinks their team's the greatest thing since sliced bread and won't have it any other way, and they're all
Yeah.
going to be 11, 12, 13 years old like I was
Yeah.
when you know and
Yeah.
then I grew up. um I think most people think that way.
Right. Yeah. There's always room for improvement, right? Even if you want to argue the US is the greatest country in history or the greatest country in the world, fine. But that doesn't mean, I think, if you're being serious, if you're being rational, if you're being a critical thinker, that doesn't mean there isn't still room for improvement, right? If you voted for change in November of 2024, you think there's room for improvement, right? And I would think that no matter who you voted for, when you came out of the polling station, you would have said, yeah, I'm voting to change some things, right? And that's how history works too, right? We're voting, or we're engaging with history with a critical eye to understand our society better, right? I even push it further than that, Josh. When I talk about it with students, I say, this is about human nature at the end of the day, right? Like, this is about understanding the good, the bad, and the ugly of how humans behave. And there's no better field for doing that over the long term than history, right? We can talk about psychology in the short term, right? But look at all this data we have by knowing 250 years worth of American history, right? We can look at how Americans act in all these different scenarios, and we can say, wow, we did that well. We didn't do that so well. Let's try to do this better, right? And I think that fundamentally, if you don't want to understand human history, then by all means, please don't study history. But if you want to understand human nature, definitely, history is one venue into that. So
Mhm.
that, that that's my spiel on why it matters. And so to understand this current moment, looking back at the past is not going to give us a crystal ball to predict what's going to happen next week or to predict what's going to happen in 4 years from now. But it might give us some lessons in how to navigate the challenges that we're facing, and also some lessons in, well, why haven't these challenges popped up before? Oh, because there were these checks and balances in place, or because there were these societal things that have changed since then.
Mhm.
I mean, that's the hope, right?
That's the hope. I think well, it feels like a losing battle in many ways, but I mean, hey, that's why we're here talking
That's
because
right.
I think it's time to fight fire with fire and stop being on the sidelines. At least that's how I feel. And this is at least a start for me personally, and I think for you personally. And
Yeah.
um, at the
Well,
very
enough.
least, it's cathartic for us.
Yeah. Yeah. It is absolutely cathartic, right? To kind of just talk about this with someone else who's thinking about it in a kind of somber, sober way. And not, and there's a lot to be scared of. There's a lot to be worked up about. There's a lot to be angry about. But talking through it at least feels like forward movement, right? And it's such a, we talked about this earlier, right? But like, it seems so self-important in a way to just sit here and record this and talk about these things like we're the experts. We're not the experts, right? But um, if you sat around on the sidelines, with your hands in your pockets, waiting for yourself to become the expert on the thing, I think it's going to be too late, right? I
And
think
that's a
we're going
real
to be,
and that's a
yeah,
real critique of, I think, uh, it is and it isn't. There is that notion in academia, right? Like you become
yeah,
such a complete expert on this little niche subject, and then all of a sudden it's like, well, there's three other people that are reading this work. So,
uh-huh.
and I think, I mean, I say that's a bit overly simplistic and overly generalizing of academics and historians, but um,
But there is
there
this like cautiousness to it, right?
there
Like you want to be
is.
careful. You don't want to say anything till you're absolutely sure.
Exactly. And we're at a point where there's no time for caution anymore.
Yeah,
And so yeah, I mean I think we've talked about talking quite a bit over the past 40, 45 minutes.
Yeah.
And I hope it was interesting. I again, like we do want to get into a lot of specifics in subsequent uh podcasts. So I just want to kind of run down a list of a couple things that we plan on touching on.
Yeah.
And like as we said, this thing wasn't even in the ether 36 hours ago. So we're not going to come in with like PowerPoint presentations next time and dig into what is postmodernism because one, that would be a lot of work. And we don't got time for it. We don't have the energy for it. And but maybe there'll be some episodes that are centered on kind of an idea from the
Yeah.
past and how we can draw parallels and understand what's going on current event wise. So a couple things. I mean, what does it mean to be an American? That's something we can all ask
Yeah.
ourselves. And I couldn't give you a great answer off the top of my head, but it's worth pondering, I think, for
Yeah.
anyone. And what is the role of our government? Like, what do we want from our government? I think
Right.
those two issues are more relevant now than perhaps ever before, at least in my lifetime.
Yeah.
What can the founding fathers tell us? Like, whether it's the presidencies of kind of Washington and Adams and Jefferson and Madison, or the Federalist Papers that many of them were writing in the lead up. Um, there's a lot of insight there that we can glean on what they did right, what they did wrong, why we have the documents, the founding documents we have, and what those documents mean, and how we interpret them. Uh, there's a lot there. Also, the flip side, the last 50 years of American history, kind of
Yeah.
the
What got us to this point? Yeah.
what got us to this actual point in history from, let's say, the 70s, the 1970s to the 2020s. And again, I think broadly speaking, neoliberalism is the umbrella, and postmodernism is an umbrella, and
Yeah.
those are two isms, and anti-intellectualism. Those are
Yes.
three isms that it's at risk of like getting into the isms and sounding too academic. Like you can't understand what's going on without understanding those.
Those forces.
Um, the role of media is probably the biggest one. Mainstream media, alternative, new, independent media, and social media. Um, the internet's role in all three of those types of
Right.
media. That gets into the isms, the postmodern, anti-intellectual, like the basic distrust we have of institutions, the distrust we have of the government, the distrust we have of academics,
Yeah.
the rejection of
Of
experts.
experts. Yeah.
Exactly. Whether it's a historian who's brainwashed by the left and is secretly communist, or it's Anthony Fauci who wants to kill you by putting chips in your brain through COVID. Um, we'll get into that. Like that's
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
that's
We have to
crucial
get into that.
to
Yeah.
understand. Um, so that's some of the broad stuff. And then I think, also we need to get granular with the current events. Like what's Doge
Yeah.
doing now?
Yeah.
Um, what is what's this idea, this kind of imperial idea that we're going to start expanding beyond 50 states? What's going
Occupying
on?
territories. Yeah.
Um, what's Silicon Valley's role in this? What are the tech bros, as they
Yeah.
say? What is their involvement with this?
Their vision for a post America. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. And also, to be fair, I think we also need to talk about the like some of the bugaboo terms that you see on Fox News that apparently we care so much about and are willing to,
Yeah.
go to any
What
lengths to defend.
What do you mean, like socialism,
Well,
fascism,
like,
that kind of stuff?
yeah, and critical race theory and
Yeah.
DEI and
Yeah.
climate
Sure.
change. I
Yeah.
mean, like, because again, I think there's a disjuncture between what people stand for and what they think other people stand for.
Yes. Yes.
Maybe
That's
on
well
both
said.
sides. Maybe on both sides. But well, we'll get into it, right?
Yeah.
Um, so I think, finding some sort of balance between the big picture stuff of American history, whether it's early
Yeah.
American history or the past half century of
Recent.
American history, um, and peppering that in with some current events. And as we know, one thing any comedian could say about Trump is that he gives them plenty of content to work with. I don't think there's going to be a dearth of stuff to talk about um, going
That's right.
forward. So,
No, yeah. Yeah, so that's I mean if you tune into more than, 10 minutes of these going forward, if we haven't scared you off yet with our lack of editing and thoughts as they come out, then that's what you can kind of expect from us, right, Josh? I mean, engagement with what's Trump up to, what's going on in the current administration, some thoughts and lessons from history perhaps thrown in, and then those big picture, academic things that seem so daunting or scary or anti-American that maybe aren't, right? I mean, that's I guess what we'll keep talking about, week to week or however often we do this, and
and the most answers to the most important question, which is why is Biden and DEI to blame for all of this? Yeah, that's where I'll leave it there.
Okay.
I'll let you end the recording, but I think we're
Yeah, we're at a good spot. Okay. Well, thanks, Josh, for talking. Thanks to anyone who listens to this too. Uh, this is cathartic and necessary, I think, to keep having these conversations, even in the midst of what feels like chaos. Either chaotic victory laps, if you're of that bent, or if you're like Josh and I and you think this is chaos and it's getting bad. Keep tuning in, and thanks, Josh, for talking. We'll see you soon.
yeah. Thanks, Johnny.